The letter arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under the door like a thief in the night, and it shattered Ethan Caldwell's world. "I can't stay," his mother's handwriting confessed, the ink trembling as if her hand shook while writing. By dawn, she was gone, leaving only silence and a 17-year-old boy staring at the word abomination scrawled in her final note. Ethan stood in the empty kitchen of their small Ohio home, the linoleum cold under his bare feet, replaying the moment he'd told her. "Mom, I'm gay," he'd said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing his chest. Her face had crumpled not with anger, but with something worse, a grief so deep it looked like betrayal. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just left. 5 years later, Ethan, now 22, stood in a different kind of light, the kind that spilled through the windows of a Brooklyn coffee shop, warm and golden. He wasn't that scared kid anymore, but the ache of his mother's absence lingered like a bruise. Across the table sat Lucas Hayes, 24, with eyes like storm clouds and a smile that could unravel Ethan's defenses in seconds. Lucas, with his leather jacket and quiet confidence, had become Ethan's anchor in a city that felt too big, too fast. They'd met a year ago at a queer poetry slam, where Lucas's words raw, unapologetic had hooked Ethan's heart. "I wrote about surviving," Lucas told him later, "over cheap diner fries, about choosing love over fear." Ethan, who'd spent years hiding his truth in a small town, felt seen for the first time. Their first kiss, under a flickering street lamp, tasted like freedom. But freedom came with shadows. Ethan's mother, Margaret, hadn't called, hadn't written, hadn't reached out since that Tuesday. He'd heard through a cousin she'd moved to a small apartment in Cincinnati, living quietly, attending church obsessively. Ethan tried to hate her, but all he could muster was a hollow longing. Lucas, though, filled that void. He was the one who'd convinced Ethan to move to New York, to chase a graphic design degree, to build a life where shame didn't dictate the terms. Today, in the coffee shop, Lucas slid a small velvet box across the table. "Open it," he said, his voice low, teasing. Ethan's hands shook as he lifted the lid, revealing 2 simple silver bands. "Marry me," Lucas whispered, and the world tilted. Ethan's laugh was half sob, half joy. "Yes," he said, and the other patrons clapped, unaware of the weight behind that single word. But the joy was fragile. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling of their cramped apartment. Lucas slept beside him, one arm flung across Ethan's chest. But Ethan's mind was 300 miles away, in Cincinnati. He hadn't invited Margaret to the wedding. He hadn't even told her about Lucas. Yet, her absence loomed, a ghost he couldn't exorcise. The next morning, Ethan sat at his desk, sketching invitations. His phone buzzed a text from his cousin. "Sarah, your mom asked about you," it read. Ethan's heart stuttered. "She saw your art on Instagram." She didn't say much, but she kept staring at your photo. Ethan's fingers hovered over the reply button, but he didn't type. Instead, he grabbed a pen and wrote a letter he wasn't sure he'd send. "Dear Mom," it began, "I'm getting married. His name is Lucas, and he makes me feel like I'm enough." The words poured out, angry, then soft, then pleading. He wrote about the boy she'd left, the man he'd become, the love he'd found. He sealed the envelope but didn't mail it. Not yet. Weeks passed, and wedding plans consumed their days. Lucas wanted a small ceremony in Prospect Park, with fairy lights and their closest friends. Ethan agreed, but his heart tugged toward closure. He mailed the letter to Cincinnati, his hands trembling as he dropped it in the box. No response came. He told himself it didn't matter. But it did. Ethan stood in front of the mirror one evening, trying on his suit, and saw his mother's eyes staring back at him. He wondered if she'd ever see him as her son again, or if that door had closed forever. Lucas found him there, quiet, and wrapped his arms around Ethan's waist. "You're enough," Lucas murmured, and Ethan believed him, if only for a moment. The wedding was 3 months away, and Ethan threw himself into the details: flowers, music, vows. But every choice felt like a defiance of the past, a declaration that he could build a family without her. Lucas, ever steady, reminded him to breathe, to focus on them. "We're writing our own story," Lucas said, and Ethan clung to that promise. Yet, in Cincinnati, Margaret sat alone in her apartment, the letter open on her table. Ethan's words stared back at her, each one a knife and a lifeline. She hadn't known he'd moved to New York. She hadn't known he'd found love. She hadn't known her son was still waiting for her, even after all these years. Margaret's apartment smelled of lavender and regret. The letter from Ethan lay on her kitchen table, its edges worn from her fingers tracing the words. She hadn't cried when she read it, but her chest ached as if something inside had cracked. She'd left Ohio 5 years ago because she couldn't face him, not after he'd sat her down at 17 and said, "Mom, I'm gay," with a bravery that made her feel small. She'd grown up in a world where those words were a sin, a stain, and her church had preached love but not acceptance. She'd written that note, calling him an abomination, because it was what she'd been taught to believe. But the moment she slipped it under his door and left, she'd felt like the real abomination. Now, at 52, Margaret lived a half-life. She worked as a librarian, attended church, and kept her distance from the world. Ethan's letter was the first she'd heard from him in years. "I'm getting married," he'd written, and the name Lucas burned into her mind. She pictured a stranger, someone who'd taken her place in her son's life. In Brooklyn, Ethan and Lucas were knee-deep in wedding chaos. The guest list was small friends from the poetry scene, Lucas's sister, a few college buddies, but every detail felt monumental. Ethan designed the invitations himself, each one a piece of art with delicate linework of 2 hands clasped under a starry sky. Lucas teased him for being a perfectionist, but Ethan saw it as a way to anchor himself. Every stroke of his pen was a choice to move forward, to build something new. But the weight of his mother's silence pressed harder as the wedding neared. Ethan hadn't expected a reply to his letter, but the hope lingered, stubborn and painful. He threw himself into work, sketching logos for a freelance gig, but his mind wandered to Cincinnati. Did she hate him? Did she miss him? Did she even read the letter? Lucas noticed the change in Ethan. One night, as they sat on their fire escape, the city humming below, Lucas took Ethan's hand. "You're thinking about her again," he said, not accusing, just knowing. Ethan nodded, staring at the skyline. "I keep wondering if I'm enough for her to come back." Lucas's grip tightened. "You're enough for me. That's the family we're building." Ethan wanted to believe it, but the past was a stubborn ghost. He remembered the Sundays he and Margaret used to spend baking cookies, laughing over her terrible singing. He remembered her reading him bedtime stories, her voice soft and steady. Those memories clashed with the image of her walking away, and he couldn't reconcile the two. Meanwhile, in Cincinnati, Margaret went to church, but the sermons felt hollow now. The preacher spoke of forgiveness, of love, but all she could think about was Ethan's letter. She'd kept it hidden in her purse, rereading it in secret. "He makes me feel like I'm enough," Ethan had written about Lucas, and those words stung. She hadn't made him feel enough. She'd failed him. One evening, Margaret drove to a park near her apartment, the same one where she used to take Ethan as a child. She sat on a bench, the letter in her lap, and watched families play in the fading light. A young couple pushed a stroller, their laughter echoing, and Margaret felt a pang of envy. She'd always imagined Ethan's future with a wife, children, a life that fit her narrow vision. Now, she tried to picture him with Lucas, but her mind drew a blank. She pulled out her phone and searched his name. His Instagram appeared, filled with sketches, cityscapes, and photos of him with a dark-haired man, Lucas. She assumed. They looked happy, their smiles unguarded. Margaret's throat tightened. She hadn't seen Ethan smile like that since he was a boy. Back in Brooklyn, the wedding was 2 months away. Ethan and Lucas met with a florist, arguing playfully over roses versus peonies. Ethan wanted white roses, simple and classic. Lucas pushed for peonies, bold and vibrant. They compromised on both, laughing as they signed the order. But later, alone, Ethan checked his phone obsessively, hoping for a message from Cincinnati. Nothing came. One night, Ethan woke from a nightmare, his mother standing at the altar, shaking her head as he tried to speak his vows. He sat up, heart racing, and Lucas stirred beside him. "You okay?" Lucas mumbled, half asleep. Ethan lied, saying yes, but the dream lingered. In Cincinnati, Margaret made a decision. She didn't know if it was courage or desperation, but she bought a bus ticket to New York. She didn't tell anyone, not even her pastor. She packed a small bag, tucked Ethan's letter inside, and boarded the bus with a heart full of fear and hope. She didn't know what she'd say when she saw him, but she knew she couldn't stay away any longer. The bus to New York smelled of stale coffee and diesel, and Margaret clutched her purse like a lifeline. She hadn't been to a city this big since her honeymoon, and the thought of facing Ethan and Lucas made her stomach twist. What if he turned her away? What if he didn't? The letter, now creased and soft from handling, was her only map to this moment. In Brooklyn, Ethan was unraveling. The wedding was 6 weeks away, and the pressure of it all work. Plans. The ghost of his mother gnawed at him. He snapped at Lucas over a forgotten RSVP, then apologized, burying his face in Lucas's shoulder. "I'm scared she'll show up," Ethan admitted, voice muffled. "And I'm scared she won't." Lucas didn't push, just held him, but Ethan felt the weight of his own words. They spent their days finalizing details. The venue, a clearing in Prospect Park, was set with a wooden arch for the ceremony. Ethan designed the programs, each page a labor of love, but every decision felt like a test. Would his mother approve? Would she even care? Lucas caught him staring into space one afternoon and pulled him into a dance in their living room. No music, just their footsteps. "We're enough," Lucas said, and Ethan tried to let the words sink in. Margaret arrived in New York on a rainy morning, the city gray and unforgiving. She checked into a cheap motel, her hands shaking as she dialed Sarah, Ethan's cousin, for his address. Sarah hesitated. "He's happy, Aunt Margaret. Don't hurt him again." The words cut, but Margaret nodded, even though Sarah couldn't see. She hung up, staring at the address scrawled on a napkin, a Brooklyn apartment, worlds away from their Ohio home. She didn't go right away. Instead, she wandered the city, her small-town sensibilities overwhelmed by the noise, the crowds, the pulse of it all. She passed a bookstore with a rainbow flag in the window and stopped, staring at the display of queer literature. A book caught her eye, Love Wins, Stories of Acceptance. She bought it, her first act of defiance against the beliefs she'd clung to for years. In Brooklyn, Ethan and Lucas met with their officiant, a warm woman named Clara who radiated calm. She asked about their vows, and Ethan faltered. "I want to promise him forever," he said, "but I keep thinking about her." Clara nodded, her eyes kind. "Your love for Lucas doesn't erase your pain. It's okay to carry both." Ethan clung to that, writing vows that night that poured out his heart, Lucas, you taught me I'm worthy of love, even when I doubted it. Margaret, meanwhile, sat in her motel room, reading Ethan's letter again. She'd brought a notebook, intending to write back, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she opened the book she'd bought, reading stories of families torn apart and rebuilt. One story, about a mother who attended her daughter's same-sex wedding, hit too close to home. She cried for the first time in years, the sobs shaking her thin frame. The next day, she took a subway to Brooklyn, her heart pounding as she stood outside Ethan's building. It was a red brick walk-up, modest but alive with potted plants on the fire escape. She didn't knock. Instead, she slipped a note under the door, a single sentence. I'm here. I want to see you. She included her motel's phone number and left, her legs trembling as she walked away. Ethan found the note that evening, and the world stopped. He read it again, then again, his hands shaking. Lucas was at a poetry reading, so Ethan was alone, staring at his mother's handwriting. It was different from the note she'd left 5 years ago. Softer, less certain. He didn't call her. He couldn't. Instead, he tucked the note into his sketchbook, next to his wedding vows, and tried to breathe. The next morning, Lucas found him staring at the note. She's here, Lucas asked, his voice careful. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Lucas sat beside him, their knees touching. What do you want to do? He asked. Ethan didn't know. He wanted to scream at her, hug her, beg her to stay. He wanted her to see him marry Lucas, to understand the life he'd built. But he was terrified she'd break him again. Margaret waited in her motel room, the phone silent. She'd expected rejection, but the silence was worse. She walked to a nearby diner, ordered coffee, and watched the world move on without her. A young man at the counter laughed with his partner, their hands brushing casually, and Margaret felt a pang. That could be Ethan, she thought. That could be her son, happy. Back at the apartment, Ethan made a decision. He dialed the motel's number, his heart in his throat. When Margaret answered, her voice was small, unfamiliar. Ethan, she said, and he almost hung up. But he didn't. Meet me tomorrow, he said. Prospect Park, noon. He hung up before she could respond, his hands shaking as he turned to Lucas. I need you there, he said, and Lucas nodded. No questions asked. Prospect Park was alive with spring, cherry blossoms drifting like soft pink snow. Ethan stood near the wooden arch where he and Lucas would marry in a month, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Lucas stood beside him, a quiet strength, his leather jacket swapped for a soft gray sweater. Ethan's eyes scanned the path, searching for Margaret, every rustle of leaves making his heart lurch. She appeared at noon, her graying hair pulled back, her face pale but resolute. She wore a simple blue dress, the kind she used to wear to church, and Ethan felt a jolt of memory Sundays, her hand in his, the smell of her perfume. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes locking onto his, and for a moment, neither spoke. Ethan, she said finally, her voice cracking. He didn't move, but Lucas squeezed his hand, grounding him. I didn't think you'd come, Ethan said, his tone sharp, betraying the hurt he'd carried for years. Margaret flinched but didn't look away. I didn't know if I could, she admitted. But I had to try. They sat on a bench, Lucas giving them space but staying close, his presence a silent promise. Ethan wanted to ask 1,000 questions: why she left, why she stayed away, why she was here now, but the words tangled in his throat. Instead, Margaret spoke first. I read your letter, she said, her hands twisting in her lap. I didn't know you were so happy. Happy? Ethan's laugh was bitter. You left me, Mom. You called me an abomination. The word hung between them, heavy and raw. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't deny it. I was wrong, she whispered. I was scared, and I was wrong. Ethan wanted to believe her, but 5 years of silence screamed louder than her words. He stood, pacing, his hands raking through his hair. You don't get to just show up, he said. I'm getting married. I built a life without you. Margaret nodded, her face crumpling. I know, she said. I wanted to see you. Lucas stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. Mrs. Caldwell, Ethan's been through a lot. If you're here, you need to show him you mean it. Margaret looked at Lucas, really looked at him, and saw the way his eyes softened when he glanced at Ethan. She nodded, swallowing hard. I want to try, she said. If you'll let me. Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he walked away, Lucas following, leaving Margaret on the bench, her hands clutching the letter she'd brought with her. Back at their apartment, Ethan collapsed onto the couch, his emotions a storm. Lucas sat beside him, silent, letting him process. I don't know if I can forgive her, Ethan said finally. Lucas nodded. You don't have to. Not yet. In her motel room, Margaret wrote another letter, her pen shaking. Ethan, I don't deserve your forgiveness, she began, but I want to know you again. I want to know Lucas. She didn't mail it. Instead, she decided to stay in New York, to show up, to prove she meant it. The next week was a blur of wedding preparations. Ethan threw himself into the details: catering, music, a playlist of their favorite songs. Lucas noticed the strain in Ethan's eyes, the way he checked his phone, half expecting another note from Margaret. One night, Lucas pulled him close. You don't have to decide anything about her now, he said. Focus on us. Ethan nodded, but the ache persisted. Margaret, meanwhile, explored Brooklyn, trying to understand Ethan's world. She visited the coffee shop where he and Lucas often went, sitting in a corner with a book, watching couples laugh and talk. She saw a flyer for a queer art exhibit and went, her heart racing as she recognized Ethan's name on a paisea, vibrant sketch of 2 figures under a starry sky. She bought it, her hands trembling, and hung it in her motel room. Ethan didn't know she was still in town. He didn't know she'd started attending a different church, one with a rainbow flag outside, where the pastor spoke of love without conditions. Margaret listened, her old beliefs cracking like thin ice. She didn't tell Ethan. She wasn't ready. As the wedding drew closer, Ethan's dreams grew restless. He saw his mother at the ceremony, sometimes smiling, sometimes turning away. He woke one morning to find Lucas sketching him, a soft smile on his face. You're my home, Lucas said, and Ethan kissed him, letting the warmth drown out the fear. Margaret made a choice. She called Sarah again, asking for help. I want to be at his wedding, she said, but I don't know how to ask. Sarah was quiet, then said, show him you've changed. That's all he needs. Margaret didn't know if she could, but she wanted to try. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and Ethan's world felt like a tightrope. He balanced Joy Lucas's laugh, their shared dreams with the weight of his mother's return. Margaret hadn't contacted him since the park, and he told himself it was better that way. But every time he passed a mailbox, he half expected another note, another plea. Lucas kept him grounded. They spent evenings writing vows, their words raw and honest. Ethan's began, Lucas, you saw me when I felt invisible. Lucas's were simpler, Ethan, I choose you. Every day? They practiced in their living room, tripping over words, laughing through tears. But Ethan's heart still carried a shadow. Margaret was still in Brooklyn, living in her motel, her days filled with small acts of courage. She attended the queer-friendly church again, sitting in the back, listening to stories of families reconciled. She bought a journal, filling it with thoughts she couldn't say aloud. I left my son because I was afraid, she wrote. Now I'm afraid of losing him forever. She visited Ethan's art exhibit again, lingering over his work. A gallery worker noticed her, mentioning Ethan's talent, his upcoming wedding. Margaret nodded, her throat tight. He's my son, she said softly, the words foreign but true. The worker smiled, unaware of the history, and handed her a flyer for Ethan's next show. Margaret kept it, a fragile tether to him. In Brooklyn, Ethan and Lucas met with their caterer, finalizing a menu of comfort food: mac and cheese, grilled chicken, peach cobbler. Ethan wanted it to feel like home, the kind he'd built with Lucas, not the one he'd lost. But his mother's face kept creeping into his thoughts. He hadn't told Lucas about the note she'd left under their door, afraid it would make her presence too real. One evening, Ethan found Lucas staring at a photo of them from their first date, framed on their bookshelf. "You're quiet lately," Lucas said, his voice gentle. Ethan sighed, sitting beside him. "She's still here, isn't she?" Lucas asked. Ethan nodded, pulling the note from his sketchbook. Lucas read it, his jaw tight. "She wants to try?" he said, handing it back. "What do you want?" Ethan didn't know. He wanted his mother, but not the one who'd left. He wanted the woman who'd baked cookies with him, not the one who'd called him an abomination. "I want her to see us," he said finally. "But I'm scared she'll ruin it." Lucas pulled him close. "She can't ruin us. We're stronger than that." Margaret, meanwhile, was trying to change. She read books on queerness, faith, and family, each page a challenge to her old beliefs. She met with the church's pastor, a woman named Rachel, who listened without judgment. "God loves your son as he is," Rachel said. "Can you?" Margaret didn't answer, but the question followed her. She wrote another letter, longer this time. "Ethan, I don't know how to be the mother you need," she wrote. "But I'm learning. I want to see you marry Lucas, if you'll let me." She didn't mail it. Instead, she went to the park where the wedding would be, imagining Ethan there, happy, whole. She left a small gift on the bench where they'd met, a sketchbook, like the ones he used to carry as a boy, with a note, "For your new chapter." Ethan found the sketchbook the next day, during a walk with Lucas. He recognized his mother's handwriting instantly, and his heart raced. The note was simple, but it hit like a wave. Lucas read it over his shoulder, his hand on Ethan's back. "She's trying," Lucas said. Ethan nodded, but the fear remained. The wedding was a week away, and Ethan's anxiety spiked. He dreamed of his mother walking away again, her back turned as he said his vows. He woke sweating, Lucas's arms around him. "You don't have to let her in," Lucas said. "But if you do, I'm here." Ethan nodded, grateful, but still torn. Margaret attended Ethan's art show that weekend, her first public step into his world. She saw him across the room, laughing with Lucas, their ease a stark contrast to her own tension. She didn't approach, but she bought another paisea drawing of two hands, intertwined, under a sky of stars. She left before Ethan noticed her, her heart pounding with hope and fear. Ethan saw the sale receipt later, his mother's name scrawled in the buyer's log. He froze, the gallery buzzing around him. Lucas squeezed his shoulder. "She's reaching out," he said. Ethan nodded, but the question lingered. Could he reach back? The wedding was 3 days away, and Ethan's world felt like it was spinning too fast. He and Lucas spent their days in a whirlwind of final touches, checking the arch, confirming the music, practicing their dance. Ethan's vows were memorized, but every time he recited them, he saw his mother's face, her note burning in his mind. He hadn't responded to her gift, the sketchbook still unopened on his desk. Lucas didn't push, but his quiet support was a lifeline. "You don't have to decide now," Lucas said one night, as they folded napkins for the reception. Ethan nodded, but the weight of her presence in Brooklyn was suffocating. He wanted to focus on Lucas, on their future, but the past kept pulling him back. Margaret, meanwhile, was still learning. She attended the queer-friendly church daily, sitting closer to the front each time, letting the words sink in. Pastor Rachel became her confidant, listening as Margaret poured out her guilt. "I called him an abomination," she admitted, tears streaming. Rachel took her hand. "You can't change the past, but you can choose now." Margaret chose to stay. She extended her motel stay, her savings dwindling, but she couldn't leave not yet. She walked to Prospect Park every day, sitting near the wedding site, imagining Ethan there, smiling. She wrote in her journal, pages filled with apologies she didn't know how to say. "I want to be at his wedding," she wrote. "I want to see him happy." Ethan, unaware of her daily pilgrimages, was unraveling. The night before the rehearsal dinner, he broke. He sat on their fire escape, the city lights blurring through tears. Lucas found him, sitting close, their shoulders touching. "I invited her," Ethan said, voice raw. "I mailed an invitation yesterday. What if she comes? What if she doesn't?" Lucas didn't have answers, but he held Ethan's hand, his thumb tracing circles. "We'll face it together," he said. Ethan nodded, leaning into him, the fear still there but softer in Lucas's presence. He didn't tell Lucas he'd included a note with the invitation. "Mom, I want you to see who I am now." The rehearsal dinner was a small affair, friends and Lucas's sister filling a cozy restaurant with laughter. Ethan smiled, but his eyes kept drifting to the door, half expecting Margaret to walk in. She didn't. He pushed the thought away, focusing on Lucas's hand in his, the warmth of their shared future. Margaret received the invitation that morning, her hands shaking as she opened it. The design was Ethan's, delicate, heartfelt, a piece of him. Her breath caught at the note inside, his words a plea and a challenge. She sat on her motel bed, the sketchbook she'd given him in her lap, and cried. She wanted to go, but fear held her back. What if he hated her? What if she failed him again? She called Sarah, her voice trembling. "He invited me," she said. Sarah was quiet, then firm. "Go, Aunt Margaret. Show up for him." Margaret nodded, though Sarah couldn't see, and hung up. She pulled out a dress she'd bought, a soft green. Simple but elegant, and laid it out, a promise to herself. The day before the wedding, Ethan and Lucas walked through Prospect Park, checking the setup. The arch was draped with white roses and peonies, fairy lights twinkling in the dusk. Ethan's heart swelled, but the fear lingered. Lucas noticed, pulling him close. "Tomorrow's about us," he said. "Whatever happens with her, we're enough." Margaret spent the day preparing. She wrote a letter, one she planned to give Ethan at the wedding. "I'm sorry," it began, "for leaving, for failing you. I want to be part of your life, if you'll let me." She tucked it into her purse, along with the sketchbook she'd bought at his exhibit, and prayed for courage. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay beside Lucas, listening to his steady breathing, and thought of his mother. He imagined her at the wedding, her face unreadable, and his chest tightened. But he also imagined her smiling, proud, and that hope, fragile, stubborn, kept him awake. In her motel, Margaret couldn't sleep either. She sat by the window, the city glowing outside, and read Ethan's note again. "See who I am now. he'd written, and she wanted to. She wanted to see her son, whole and happy, marrying the man he loved. She didn't know if she deserved it, but she'd try. The morning of the wedding dawned clear. The sky a soft blue over Prospect Park. Ethan woke early, his heart a tangle of nerves and hope. Lucas was already up, brewing coffee, his calm anchoring Ethan's chaos. Ready to marry me? Lucas teased, handing him a mug. Ethan smiled, but his eyes drifted to the window, wondering if Margaret would come. They dressed together in their apartment. Ethan in a tailored navy suit, Lucas in charcoal gray. They laughed over crooked ties, their hands brushing as they adjusted each other's collars. Ethan's vows, folded in his pocket, felt like a lifeline. But the invitation he'd sent his mother weighed heavier, its silence louder than the city outside. Margaret woke at dawn, her green dress laid out like a promise. She reread her letter to Ethan, her words clumsy but honest. She tucked it into her purse, along with the sketchbook, and took a cab to the park, her heart pounding. She hadn't told Ethan she was coming, hadn't known how. Now, standing at the edge of the clearing, she saw the arch, the roses, the fairy lights, and her breath caught. It was beautiful, like Ethan. Guests arrived, a small crowd of friends and chosen family. Lucas's sister, Mia, hugged Ethan tightly, whispering, "You're glowing." The officiant, Clara, smiled warmly, her presence steadying. Ethan scanned the crowd, his heart sinking as he saw no sign of Margaret. Lucas squeezed his hand. "Focus on us," he said, and Ethan nodded, trying to let go. The ceremony began, music soft and lilting. Ethan and Lucas stood under the arch, hands clasped, their eyes locked. Clara spoke of love, resilience, and chosen family, her words weaving a cocoon around them. Ethan's vows came first, his voice steady despite the lump in his throat. "Lucas, you saw me when I felt invisible. You taught me I'm worthy of love, and I promise to love you fiercely, every day." Lucas's vows were quieter, but no less fierce. "Ethan, you're my home, my strength. I choose you, every day, no matter what." The crowd sighed, some wiping tears, and Ethan felt the world narrow to just them. They exchanged rings, simple silver bands glinting in the sunlight, and Clara pronounced them married. The kiss that followed was soft, certain, a promise sealed. Margaret stood at the back, hidden by a tree, her hands trembling. She'd arrived just as the vows began, too afraid to step closer. Ethan's words broke her open, his love for Lucas raw and undeniable. She saw the boy she'd raised, now a man, happy in a way she hadn't imagined. Tears streamed down her face, but she stayed silent, watching. The reception began, tables set with fairy lights and peonies. Ethan and Lucas danced, their laughter infectious, pulling friends onto the grass. Ethan's heart was full, but a piece was missing. He glanced at the crowd, still hoping, still fearing. Lucas noticed, whispering, "You okay?" Ethan nodded, but the ache remained. Margaret hesitated, then stepped forward, her letter in hand. A friend of Ethan's, recognizing her from a photo, approached. "Mrs. Caldwell?" he asked. She nodded, startled. "He'd want you here," the friend said, guiding her toward the reception. Margaret's legs felt weak, but she followed, clutching the letter like a shield. Ethan saw her first, his breath catching. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her green dress catching the light, her face a mix of fear and hope. Lucas followed his gaze, his hand tightening on Ethan's. "Go," Lucas said softly. Ethan hesitated, then walked toward her, the crowd parting. "Mom," he said, his voice barely audible. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan," she said, "I'm so sorry." She held out the letter, her hand shaking. "I didn't know if you'd want me here, but I had to come." Ethan took the letter, his fingers brushing hers, a spark of memory her hand in his. Years ago. He didn't read it yet. Instead, he looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman who'd left, but also the one who'd come back. "Stay?" he said, the word heavy with years of pain and hope. Margaret nodded, tears falling, and Ethan felt something shift, a crack in the wall between them. Lucas joined them, his arm around Ethan. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his voice warm but guarded. "I'm Lucas." Margaret smiled, tentative. "You make him happy," she said, and Lucas nodded, his eyes softening. The reception hummed with laughter, music, and the clink of glasses. But for Ethan, the world narrowed to his mother's presence. Margaret stood awkwardly at the edge, her green dress a quiet contrast to the vibrant crowd. Ethan held her letter, unopened, his heart a battlefield of hope and fear. Lucas stayed close, his hand a steady anchor on Ethan's back. "Will you sit with us?" Ethan asked, his voice low, testing. Margaret nodded, her eyes bright with tears. They found a table, the three of them an uneasy trio amidst the joy. Friends glanced over, curious but kind, giving them space. Ethan's fingers traced the letter's edge, unsure if he was ready for its words. Margaret spoke first, her voice soft. "I didn't know love could look like this," she said, glancing at Lucas. Then Ethan. "I was wrong, Ethan. About so much." Her words were a knife, sharp with regret, but also a bridge, fragile and new. Ethan didn't respond, but he listened, his heart cracking open. Lucas broke the silence, his tone gentle but firm. "Mrs. Caldwell, Ethan's built a life here. It hasn't been easy." He wasn't accusing, just stating truth. And Margaret nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. "I know," she said. "I want to be part of it, if you'll let me." Ethan's throat tightened. He wanted to believe her, but the memory of her leaving, of that word abomination, burned. "Why now?" he asked, his voice raw. Margaret met his gaze, unflinching. "Because I saw you today," she said. "I saw you happy, and I realized I'd been running from my own fear, not from you." He opened the letter then, unable to wait. Her words spilled out apologies, regrets, a promise to learn. "I want to know you again," she'd written, "and the man you love." Ethan's eyes stung, and he handed the letter to Lucas, who read it silently, his expression softening. The music shifted, a slow song pulling couples to the dance floor. Lucas stood, offering Ethan his hand. "Dance with me?" he asked, a smile tugging at his lips. Ethan glanced at Margaret, then took Lucas's hand, letting himself be led to the grass. They swayed, Lucas's arms steady, and Ethan felt the weight of the day lift, just a little. Margaret watched, her heart aching with pride and pain. She saw Ethan smile, the way Lucas held him, and understood what she'd missed. She didn't join the dance, but she stayed, clapping when the song ended, her hands trembling. Ethan caught her eye, and for the first time in years, he didn't look away. The night wore on, filled with toasts and laughter. Ethan and Lucas cut the cake, feeding each other with playful grins, the crowd cheering. Margaret clapped, a small smile breaking through. She didn't speak much, but she listened, absorbing Ethan's world as friends, his art, his love. As the reception wound down, Ethan found her again. "Will you stay in Brooklyn?" he asked, the question heavy with hope. Margaret nodded. "I'm trying to find a place. She said, I want to be close, if you're okay with that. Ethan didn't answer right away, but he nodded, a small gesture that felt monumental. Lucas joined them, carrying 2 slices of cake. For you, Mrs. Caldwell, he said, handing her one. She took it, her smile tentative but real. Call me Margaret, she said, and Lucas grinned, a spark of warmth between them. The night ended with Ethan and Lucas walking through the park, hand in hand, the fairy lights glowing behind them. Margaret followed at a distance, her heart full. She didn't expect forgiveness. Not yet, but she'd seen her son marry the man of his dreams. And that was enough for now. Months later, Margaret rented a small apartment in Brooklyn, a few blocks from Ethan and Lucas. She attended their church, joined a book club, and started volunteering at a queer youth center. Ethan visited, hesitant at first, but the visits grew longer, the silences softer. Lucas cooked dinner for the 3 of them one night, and they laughed, the sound tentative but real. Ethan never forgot the pain, but he learned to carry it alongside the love. His mother wasn't perfect, but she was trying, and that was a start. He and Lucas built their life, one day at a time, their home filled with art, laughter, and the promise of tomorrow. And Margaret, watching from the sidelines, learned to love her son as he was whole, happy, and enough.